Welcome to What's Your Why? The Author's Journey, brought to you by Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emy DiGrappa. My special guest today is Max Marshall. Max is a writer living in Austin, Texas. His first book, which we will discuss today, super excited about that, is titled Among the Bros, a fraternity crime story. And I learned by reading his bio, actually, that book is being worked on to turn into a movie. So that's super exciting as well. A
Yeah.
feature film, really. Is that what you'd call it, Max? A feature film?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, feature. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
standalone movie. I just finished the screenplay for Sony about a month ago, so feeling excited.
Oh my gosh. So when you go through that process, are you kind of, in a sense, rewriting your book for the screen? Like you're having to look at it in a new way.
Definitely. I mean, the old Marshall McLuhan quote, "The medium is the message." It's like it's such a different medium ultimately. Well, first of all, it's 90 minutes to 2 hours, and so you're ultimately cutting a lot. I think a lot of the time, actually, short stories or novellas work better for movies than books, just because books, you're sort of going off in all these different cul-de-sacs and you kind of build a whole world. It's almost, in that sense, more like, I don't know, a season of a TV show or something, if you want to think in filmic terms. But yeah, there's that. But then, of course, there's just like you can't go inside people's heads. You can't, just come in as a narrator and explain, here's what happened over the last summer or something like that. There's really only actions and dialogue. And so it's the constraints are very fun once you sort of give into them. But yeah, you have to give into them. And then of course it goes from a true story to based on a true story to, inspired by a true story to, a whisper of a true story. But
Yes.
yeah. But it's fun. I mean, it's something I had dreamed of doing since I was a kid and I never thought would get to do with this book. So yeah, it was a great experience.
Oh my gosh. So are you done with that part of it? Is it now on to another level? What?
Yeah, so now the next phase is Sony sends it to directors and, starts trying to develop it basically.
Okay.
So it is out of my hands.
Is that, oh my gosh. But is that, I don't know, because I've heard different things from writers, whether or not it can be a frustrating or a satisfying journey.
I think it's satisfying to learn a new form, and I love movies and I love thinking about, going and trying to watch movies that might be good comps for this, or, try to mash up different movies in your head and think, what could work. I do think the frustrating part is as a writer, you have a pretty clear pathway to people getting to experience your work and you get to share your work, and that's just, one of the best feelings. And with a movie, you write a screenplay and then it might be years, if at all, if anyone gets to see the what you worked on. And yeah, I think the other thing, of course, is like going from total control and just sort of being the little dictator of the page to, being part of this massive collaborative machine. But I think that can be good too. I mean, it's obviously writing's a pretty solitary pursuit, but investigative journalism and the kind of journalism I do is it's kind of a weird hot plunge, cold plunge where you go out in the field for a year, 2 years, and you're just having all these conversations with people. And really, it's almost like therapy sessions that you're recording. But then you go into a cave and you write for a year or two. And so I think the movie writing is sort of like that too, where it's like there's parts of it that are super collaborative and social, and a lot of people are throwing in ideas, and you're just one sort of stop on the assembly line. But at another level, you still have the solitude of writing. So it's a nice mix.
Thinking about that, because I think it was Ernest Hemingway. We went to his house
Oh,
in
nice.
West.
Yeah,
Such an interesting story.
yeah,
I think he was one of the first writers that became part of the film industry, where his books were being turned into movies.
definitely.
And it was just interesting, his journey in that.
100%. I mean, that generation, of course, Fitzgerald spent a lot of time in Hollywood and, he wrote that famous essay, The Crack Up, basically about falling apart. And his journey to Hollywood went that badly. And, even people you don't think of as very, sort of narrative nuts and bolts writers, like Faulkner spent time in Hollywood. And really the list goes on from then until now. I think Billy Wilder had a famous quote about Fitzgerald trying to be a screenwriter, and it was something like a master sculptor trying to learn how to do plumbing. Because screenwriting in a way is much more plumbing. You got to keep the water flowing, and it's sort of if you remove one pipe, then the water starts to spray everywhere, or you stop having flow, and it's the sort of elegance of the construction is sort of secondary to just keeping things moving and having everything fit together. And I do think that is ultimately pretty different from writing a book, even from writing like a thriller kind of book. But for whatever reason, I mean, you can kind of guess why Hollywood continues to be the sort of sirens that writers can't help but getting off the boat and hopping on the island and seeing how they fare.
Yeah, true. I didn't think about it like that, but I guess I just realized when I had never really thought about that era, of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, those great writers, that when I think cinematography was becoming a big thing, it had
Yeah.
gone from like black and whites and there was becoming a new era of movie making.
Yeah, definitely, and also just moving from silent pictures to talkies, and
Right.
there's and yeah, and then all of a sudden the writer becomes you think in a very important part of the circus. Although I think writers find pretty quickly that Hollywood is not a writer's town in that sense. The right it's I remember being reading early on, filmmaking is a director's medium, stage is the actor's medium, and TV is the writer's medium because you have the TV showrunner in the writer's room and they have to churn out so many episodes. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, maybe as a writer, TV would be the dream. But I remember talking to a TV writer and I said, yeah, I heard, film is a director's medium, stage is an actor's medium, TV is the writer's medium. And he said, they're all the medium of whoever's writing the checks, and I think there's probably some truth to that.
Yep, I think
Yeah.
so. Oh my gosh. So let's talk about you, Max, because I'm super excited about hearing your journey, where you grew up, where you went to school, and kind of the inspiration behind the book you wrote.
Sure. So yeah, I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I think I'm a sixth or seventh generation Texan. But when people hear that, they imagine, some old oil family or something. But my family were mostly cattle thieves, and I think I had one great uncle who died robbing a train or something, and bootleggers, that kind of thing. But I grew up in a pocket of Dallas that was very people call it the bubble or the fairway because it kind of looks like a golf course, but it's a very country clubby, private schooly kind of part of Texas. And I went to an all boys school that's 100 years old, and we all wear the same shorts no matter what the weather is. I actually really loved the school, but it definitely got me thinking about a lot of the things that this book ultimately is about. It was like this kind of gilded bubble. It was all male. Basically, all of my friends, me included, went on to join fraternities. And that was just the world I was so seeped in that I almost didn't know the alternative. I guess the biggest formative experience of my childhood and sort of young adulthood was one of the alums of my school was the musician Steve Miller from the Steve Miller Band. And he came back for my school's 100th birthday. And I was a little blues guitar player, and he heard me play. And I guess kind of liked what he heard and invited me to play that concert. And after that, started to kind of invite me to join him on the road and kind of tour with him. And yeah, that was all because of my school. But it was funny. He basically has enough greatest hits for a show minus about four songs. And so for those four songs, he's always looking for something interesting to keep the crowd going. And for some of his Texas tours or some shows in New York, the way he would keep it interesting is being like, here comes, little Max Marshall to play some blues solos. And so I'd come out and do that. But it was a very intense experience to play in front of these pretty, I think, one show there was maybe 15,000 people there. And that it was an intense experience. And I saw, I think, the intensity with which he kind of attacked making music. And I think it very much fueled kind of how I wanted to approach writing once I got around to it, once I got to New York and kind of started college.
That is so interesting. And, I always think about the caste system or the caste society,
Yeah,
how it's very much alive and well in throughout the world.
absolutely.
You see it much more prevalently in like Mexico or Latin America. But it's interesting how the caste system, and I wish people knew more about the caste system because I happen to know a lot about it because I had a dance company and we
Okay.
did the whole journey of the Spaniard into Mexico and the mestizo culture
Of course.
and how, if you were this class, you could wear this clothing. If you were
Yeah,
this class, just going all the way back to the pure Indian who was
definitely.
on the lowest part of the totem pole.
Yeah.
But what you're explaining to me right now is a class system where you enter into a privilege based on where you go to school.
100%. And something that I thought was really interesting is, so the book's called Among the Bros, and it's about fraternity culture. And one thing I felt that was missing from writing about quote unquote bro culture and certainly writing about fraternities is a lot of the writing was very class blind. Like people really just talked about it in terms of masculinity, which is an interesting lens, but ultimately the fraternity system from the beginning has been about creating a separate campus for the elite. Before the sort of mid 18 or 1800s, there wasn't even a need for a fraternity system because basically all American students were elite students once you got to the college level. But sort of in the early to mid 1800s, all of a sudden you have middle class sort of farm kids showing up to want to be preachers. And all of a sudden, all the guys from, the equivalent of, Greenwich, Connecticut sort of came together and said, well, we don't want to get drunk with these guys. So like, let's create our own club. And every time US universities have become more inclusive, fraternities have become more exclusive. So, like, they didn't have language about excluding Jewish students until Jewish students, of course, show up. And the racial language doesn't really pick up except for the most southern fraternities until the 20th century when schools start integrating. But getting back to what you're saying about Latin America, I think it's really interesting. It goes beyond fraternities. The idea of the bro. So, like one of my friends who went to UT and was in a fraternity at UT, he's a Venezuelan aristocrat, cattle baron, and he went to the big sort of all boys private school in Caracas. Now, of course, everyone was dispersed, so no one is still in Venezuela of his sort of cohort. They're all in Miami or Madrid or CDMX, but or in America. But he said that the most socially dominant group of guys at his school in Caracas were called Los Bros. And so, it's like it's not just an American concept. I think it's exported from America, but I think it really, yeah, that sort of caste system can really take hold anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. So what made you, well, I did read in your bio that you consider yourself an investigative reporter writer.
Yeah.
So tell me about that journey.
So yeah, I mean, I wasn't planning on doing investigative work. I basically, as a musician, I thought I would kind of be doing music and culture writing. And after 4 years in New York for college, I moved to Hanoi, Vietnam to, try to figure out. I was working as a journalist there, but I was doing sort of cultural journalism, and I had pitched a small web piece to GQ magazine about a director who had made a King Kong movie filmed in Vietnam. The movie had done very well, grossed like $500 million. And he was in his early 30s and basically decided to leave LA, sell his house, and move to Ho Chi Minh City and become the tourism ambassador. And I thought, okay, this is pretty interesting. I mean, that's worth at least, like a sort of Q&A. So I went out with him for a night in Ho Chi Minh City, he took me to this nightclub. We talked about Vietnam. I interviewed the author Viet Thanh Nguyen about, cultural imperialism in Hollywood, and, was going to fold that together into a piece. And then right before the piece ran, he went back to that same nightclub, and a dozen, at the time, anonymous sort of organized crime members beat him almost to the point of death. They basically destroyed this entire nightclub, flipped all the tables, destroyed a bunch of property, but then they started kicking him and sort of beating him into the ground. And then one of these organized criminals took a Hennessy bottle, I think it was, and started smashing him in the head, and he had hemorrhages, contusions, internal bleed, all these things, but a really, really severe concussion to the point where he was out for about 2 weeks. And when he came to, the police told him, "Don't look into who did this. They're sort of too connected. They're above our pay grade." And of course, I was the only journalist he knew in Vietnam at the time. I was a 22-year-old culture writer, but he called and asked, "Can you help me solve the case?" And I didn't have anything going on, so I said, of course. And so over the next year, I kind of learned the tools of investigative journalism. Everything from developing law enforcement sources, developing, criminal world sources, finding the right primary documents, building out a network of who to talk to, just, everything I could figure out. And ultimately, we did solve the case. And it was these sort of Vietnamese Canadian drug runners. I mean, they were connected to El Chapo. They're big time drug traffickers and one was wanted for murder in Canada and had fled to Vietnam. But yeah, that was kind of the beginning, I think.
Wow. Did you ever feel your life was in danger at all?
Yeah, I was definitely in over my skis, or whatever metaphor you want to use. I was supposed to get escorted out of the country by like a little security team. I was talking to them, and basically they said, okay, we're gonna have someone pick you up in this sort of armored vehicle, and you're gonna lay low. We're gonna take you to the airport, and we're gonna talk on this encrypted cell phone or signal app. And at the end of the conversation, I said, by the way, who are you investigating? And when I told them, they said, I'm sorry, that's too dangerous. We can't help you. But I suggest you take an Uber. And so, yeah, I took an Uber, and of course, everyone was telling me to lay low, but I'm like a white blonde 6'4" guy, like it's not. I sort of felt like, you go in with these sort of Don Quixote fantasies of like, oh, I'm this like swashbuckling investigative journalist and this is like James Bond or something, and then pretty quickly you realize I'm very afraid, and please, like I need to get out of here. And I you just your fantasies run into reality pretty quick of like, oh, there are actually very dangerous people out there who don't want these stories out there, and so you have to navigate that.
Oh my gosh. How fluent are you in Vietnamese?
And not at all. I mean, so yeah, my year there, I was working for the English language. It was owned by the Vietnamese government, but it was the English language paper. And there's been a big push over the last 20 plus years to teach English there. Basically, everyone takes English, and so anytime I would talk to anyone, they all, of course, wanted to practice their English. And so and their I think Vietnamese is a tonal language. It has, I think, even more tones than Cantonese. It, it's quite difficult, and so when I would try, people would just sort of scratch their head and then speak, as very good English to me. So, but I did have some friends who definitely made fun of my lack of Vietnamese ability, understandably.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I can't imagine. My grandson is adopted from Hong Kong.
Oh wow.
Mhm. And that's his tongue.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean it's an absolutely beautiful place, and I hope to go back. I think for a while I was afraid to after the piece came out, but I think it's been a long enough time. And also I think as when you're young, you sort of overestimate the power of what investigative journalism could do, and think I thought like, oh, once this piece comes out, everyone's going to be on the run, and like the police are going to come in. But ultimately the sort of head of this criminal group, a year after the piece came out, opened his own nightclub and had a webcam running where you could see the nightclub at any time and you could just see him there, getting bottle service and yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, so when you came back to the States and you had started your career in investigative journalism, is that when you decided to write the book?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I had seen a lot of Xanax when I was in college. I was really surprised by just how much Xanax was a massively popular party drug. People were using it to just kind of black out on, Thursday through Saturday nights. And then also sort of an anxiety drug. People use it for their hangovers on, Friday through Sunday mornings. I wanted to write about it somehow. And so when I was very young, I pitched Texas Monthly. I just said, there's a lot of Xanax in college. You can look at the overdose rates. They've actually outpaced opiate overdoses over the last 20 years in terms of rate of increase. And my editor said, this sounds really interesting, but you need to find a specific story to write about. You don't want to just write a trend piece. And so after doing the GQ story and starting to learn about sort of international drug trafficking, I thought, okay, well, what's the sort of crime story here? What's the supply side story? Because if I can write about where the supply is coming from, then you naturally work your way to getting to write about the demand. And I did the very investigative journalist thing of I literally just Googled Xanax bust fraternity. And the first result was about these guys at the College of Charleston who had been arrested with, they said, 40,000 Xanax pills and a grenade launcher, assault rifles, cocaine, LSD, MDMA, a bunch of different things. And I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. I mean, 40,000 pills is more than I've ever seen in one place. But then I called a defense lawyer who sort of let it slip on our first call that it was actually closer to 3 million pills. And the police had never publicized just how much they found. And so then I realized there might be, a book there.
Really good story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
As an investigative reporter, and thank God you're in the US, maybe not thank God, because that sounds horrible. The whole Xanax, like
Yeah.
when I was reading about your book, I thought this is so surreal.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, surreal is definitely the right word. It's sort of this absurdity that just like fractals further and further out of control the deeper you get into it.
I guess when I was reading about it, and especially all the interviews you did about your book with, different, the New York Times, and I can't remember all the places I read, but there were several interviews that were done with you about the book. And I guess it just makes you sick to your stomach when you think about, especially one writer in one of your interviews I just recently read said, these are our future politicians.
Yeah.
That's creepy.
And it kind of gets back to the caste system thing. I mean, when I was in college, a lot of fraternities would distribute these brochures that, would have these statistics. And one I found on the Cornell website that we ended up reprinting in the book was something like all but four, and this was in 2016, but it was 2012, but it was all but four presidents since 1860, something like 85% of Fortune 500 CEOs, over 70% of Supreme Court justices, and over 80% of senators. I'm paraphrasing the statistics, but it's in that ballpark. They were all fraternity alumni. The way these brochures were sort of talking about it was like, look what a great leadership program fraternities are. It creates all of these future leaders. But and there might be some truth to that, but I think a lot of it's this sort of chicken and egg thing where it's like, well, also fraternities are the group, and Greek life more broadly are the sort of sorting house for the elite on American colleges. It's where the wealth goes. Because there's another statistic that fraternities don't publicize as much, which is well over 50% of every dollar given to U.S. universities comes from Greek life alumni. And you're talking about 3% of the population. So you're just seeing this sort of amount of wealth that's concentrated in this system. And yeah, so it is, future senators, future investment bankers. I mean, that's the way the system works. And it's interesting, like we live in, sort of conspiratorial age, and people like to think about secret societies and, Illuminati or, a Knights Templar or whatever it is. But really, these things are hiding in plain sight. It's like there are these sorting systems where country clubs are another one where like elite people get together in plain sight, and there's a process where people apply, and you kind of only get in if you're one of the boys.
So were you also in a fraternity when you went to college?
I was, yeah. And my fraternity was, I'm from Dallas, as we talked about. I think I was from the smallest town in my fraternity. It was all guys from like New York, LA, but also like Paris, Milan, London. But it was a lot of like boarding school, Andover, Exeter, or like prep school guys. And yeah, it was very much it was the sort of Columbia version. It wasn't, Southern, SEC football tailgates. It was like going clubbing and, wearing Todd's shoes or, whatever. But like it was the same idea, just in a different context.
Well, did you get ostracized or outed or, were they upset that you wrote the story?
There were a few people maybe back home in Texas who were upset, but I actually think like as I was writing the book, it was really important to me. It almost was guiding every sentence. I was thinking like, okay, well, because I have family in small Texas towns, and then I have friends in Bushwick, New York, who would never step foot in a anything having to do with Greek life. And I sort of would think with every sentence, I was like, what's a sentence that both these people can sort of meet under the tent and like either think is fair or will upset both of them, you know? But either way, that is sort of like not just, I didn't want it to just be an outsider finger waggy account about Greek life. Almost everyone in my life was in Greek life, and I was too, but I wanted it to be an insider's guide to like, okay, well, what is it actually like in these things? I think so many people in my generation and fraternities have lost, almost everyone I know has lost a friend or watched a friend sort of go off the path they were on because of this sort of pharmaceutical crisis and Greek life. So I think people were, if anything, wanted some light shined on it.
I'm really always interested and curious about how people drug other people in bars. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems to be pretty prevalent. I mean, it's not.
So yeah, the whole day rape phenomenon on college campuses and in the world at large is absolutely, if anything, it's probably an underreported phenomenon because a lot of the time it doesn't end up in the news, or it doesn't even end up in the arrest reports because people will just go home the next day, and I know so many stories like that. Something that fascinated me about Xanax dropping on college campuses was the amount guys would do it to each other. So like in that sense, it wasn't explicitly sexual. It was just sort of a prank. People called it because like a quarter bar of Xanax is called a QB by some guys because quarter bar. And so, the football play QB sneak, it was a thing people would QB sneak each other, and they would just drop a quarter bar of Xanax into, your friend's Keystone Light, and next thing you know, he feels like he had five Keystone Lights or, or more. And that was something people would do almost like like the merry pranksters and Tom Wolf's electric Kool-Aid acid test, like spiking the punch almost kind of idea. But then they would also actually spike the punch with Xanax, and they wouldn't tell sorority girls who were there, so they would drink and they would get blacked out. But what was fascinating is the guys would drink the punch too, so they would black out. And so it was this sort of collective blackout they were trying to stir up. But yeah, so many of the sorority alumni I spoke to for the book basically said I knew I would just never drink the punch at a fraternity party for that reason.
God, and even outside of the fraternity, just knowing a few girlfriends of mine who have said, I don't remember going home. I don't remember what happened.
Yeah,
And it's like, okay, I live in Wyoming. I'm thinking,
yeah,
oh my God.
definitely, definitely. I think, and also, I mean, just the idea of the blackout, right, is I think pretty central to this book, and it's I think in my parents' generation, a lot of people they still think blackout means passing out, but of course, blacking out means you're sort of a you're walking around, but the recorder light on the camcorder isn't on, and you're just like you don't remember anything. For a lot of guys when I was in school, blacking out was the goal. There was like sort of social prestige in like getting to that point of blacking out. You know, it showed just how little you cared, or maybe it showed how much you could get away with. And I know that sounds ridiculous. I know like saying that out loud, it's like, no, no one wants to black out. But like truly, I really mean it. But also this idea of sort of a collective memory loss, like in this book, these tragedies would just sort of mount where it would be, students were dying, like at a pretty tragic clip. One of the fraternities that was most involved in the drug ring, they had two students and one recent alumnus die in like a, 6 month period. Two of them died the same weekend. And the parties just never stopped. And sometimes the craziest party was the funeral after party. But then like the next weekend, you could bet there was going to be another party. And one of the guys who had been to all these funerals and was kind of tangent, he knew a lot of the people in the drug ring. He was in this fraternity. He was like, the whole thing was almost like a Xanax blackout. It was like, all right, we're sad. All right, we have our night. And then next day, it's like he wasn't even there. And that, yeah, that really, that kind of haunted me while I was writing this. It was like trying to commit to memory something that people had really tried very hard to forget.
Gosh, Max, that makes me even more sad because it just makes me see how these people, whether they realize it or not, right now, they are like losing their soul. They're giving up a piece of themselves that they will never have again.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, losing those memories definitely. But I do think on the I did talk to so many guys who did, sort of claw their way out of this and find, it's not a I'm not a total fatalist about this stuff. I think, Xanax it's one of the two drugs that's so addictive you can die from withdrawals, and that's what we're up against. But at the same time, like I talked to plenty of guys who did find a way to sort of step out of that hurricane and figure out what they wanted their lives to be. And yeah, I do one thing that's interesting is, when I started reporting this book, I think the first time I looked up Xanax Bus Fraternity, I was maybe 24. And this book came out when I was 30. And so even in that time, I really went from seeing these guys as kind of my peers to when you're 30 looking at a college student, you realize just how young a college student is, They still have some like baby fat in their cheeks and like some some hope in their eyes and like and I it just it's not to absolve them at all, but I think it is to say that it's not too late for anyone who loses their way when they're 18. It's not too late to figure something out, I think. I mean, obviously
I agree.
there
I,
are
I, I
yeah,
have kids. I can agree more. It's not too
yeah,
late. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so tell me about your next book because that sounds pretty awesome as well. What's
Yeah,
it-
so I mean, it's about electronic dance music and DJs, and it's in that sense a pretty similar world. It's like the kind of crazy party world of
Right?
raves and festivals. But this is a much more first person book. I was inspired by all these books of participatory journalism where journalists sort of set out to see if they can do a career. And so HarperCollins is sending me out basically to learn how to DJ. And so I'm starting by playing bar mitzvahs and weddings, but at the peak, I'm hoping to, travel Europe and sort of play clubs. And, I've already been playing clubs around Austin. And yeah, it's sort of a way to immerse readers in the world of electronic dance music, which I think no one is I think a lot of people don't realize just how massive it's gotten. Las Vegas makes more money from DJs than they do from gambling now. It's truly like, in some senses the dominant form of entertainment in the world, like live entertainment. But it's also something that everyone sort of secretly thinks is easy, that all you got to do is push a button and and so I'm sort of going out to test just how easy or hard it is.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting because I know my son loves to make his own music and he's a sound engineer.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, and it is a big deal. And I
Yeah.
never knew how big of a deal it is until, my son got involved in all of it. And then,
Is he DJ?
no, but he's talked about it.
Nice.
Yeah, so he might call you. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to talk to him, sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I just never realized. Well, I think when I was going to school at Cal State Long Beach in California,
Okay.
a whole big thing, it wasn't live bands, it was DJs, but it was like these underground clubs.
Yeah, and that's what I fell in love with first was sort of underground dance music. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. When I was in high school, I was going to see Avicii and stuff. But then I moved to New York and kind of fell in love with, more underground house and techno. But it's all, the even the distinction between underground and commercial is so blurred now, where you'll have, for instance, like Boiler Room was this YouTube channel that would play a lot of like very cool DJs from New York and London. But recently, like Rebecca Black, who did that big YouTube hit Friday, like it's like pop music and underground dance music are completely incestuous, for lack of a better word, at this point. It's all these different like bubbles that overlap, and it's a very crazy world. And I think in one way it feels very different than the first book, but in another it's like I think there are these kind of party cultures that, maybe good intellectual people, scare quotes, like don't take seriously or they won't sort of dismiss easily, but actually are fueling a lot of American culture and actually might have a lot to say about the way we live now if you're willing to sort of enter the party and deal with the strobe light and the hangover and the come down. And so, yeah, throwing yourself into these sort of party situations, you can learn a lot, I think.
That's so interesting. And of course, belonging to, a big group of girls who just wanted to go out. We just wanted to go out and dance.
Yeah,
Okay. We weren't about the drinking. We just
yeah,
wanted to go out and dance and
definitely.
dress up and have someone drive us there, if we did drink and, but it was just about the party. It was just about,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
checking
100%.
out and just
Yeah,
having fun.
yeah, 100%. And it's about as much fun as you can have. Like a great night of dancing, I do think is maybe my favorite thing. And what's fascinating about the DJ world is in some ways it's this like total Barnum and Bailey sort of smoke and mirrors circus where, some people aren't even, they really do just press play and then jump around up there. But then at the same time, like a great DJ set at its best is like can be kind of life-changing, honestly, not to be corny, but like it really can. And so yeah, I think even that tension between like everyone thinks they could do it, but the people who do it best are, basically treated like deities. I think that's interesting.
Oh my gosh. Do you have a club or clubs in Las Vegas that I should visit? I'm so interested
Oh,
that
that's interesting. I was actually interviewing a guy who plays Live Beach last week, and hopefully I'm going to go out there and watch him play.
okay.
But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch. There's all the beach clubs like Encore and Fontainebleau, and then there's at night there's like tons,
Okay.
Hakkasan, and there's a bunch. But
I'm gonna check it out. I didn't
yeah,
I yeah.
it's fun. I mean, it's a crazy that all that money comes from bottle service because you can buy somebody will spend $100,000 on a table with some sparklers and some Grey Goose, and so it's that's a pretty good profit margin.
Oh my God, yes. Oh, when you finish the book, you gotta get in touch with me and we'll do another interview because I
Yeah,
want
I
to
would love that. That'd be a lot of fun.
I
Um,
yeah, that would be so much fun. Well, it has been so great talking to you. I need to know all the places that people can find you. I'll put it in your description when I launch the podcast, but also if you have any special places that people can find you and talk to you, that'd be great.
so yeah, I mean, my DJ name is No Socials because I don't have any social media, but I do. You can find my website is max-marshall.com and my email's on there, and anyone whoever wants to reach out can shoot me an email.
Very cool. All right, Max, it has been so fun talking to you.
I really enjoyed it, Amy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I learned a lot.
Yeah, me too, honestly. But thank you. Have a good one.